Hey everyone, joining me today in Oklahoma City, my guest is Aaron Lapsley, principal and founder of System 2 Consulting. Aaron, welcome to Healthy Air.
Thanks. Happy to be with you.
So I want to provide our listeners with a brief background on Aaron to provide context for today's discussion. Aaron has 15 years of experience in engineering and management consulting with an extensive background in energy management, building design, real estate strategy and operations, and industrial IoT technology. He was the former head of digital buildings practice at Cushman Wakefield and has recently launched his own consulting practice. Aaron has designed, upgraded energy and mechanical infrastructure in some of the most iconic buildings in New York. Aaron has an MBA from Harvard Business School, a Bachelor's of Science in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Oklahoma, and is a licensed professional engineer in 3 states. So Aaron, please tell us how you got started in engineering and building design, and share your career path, and tell us about your firm, System 2 Consulting.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. My career path is a little bit strange. I've kind of worked in a lot of different services areas in real estate, which I think has got me a pretty broad perspective. I actually started out in oil and gas. I worked for less than a year for Smith Phipps as a drilling company, and actually went back to graduate school for petroleum engineering. And I ended up dropping out after a year to move up to New York. And I moved up there without a job, just looking for a big change, and had the intention to try to get into architectural engineering, basically in some capacity. Moved up there for personal reasons to follow up my wife, who had moved up for graduate school. It actually ended up doing that. So like in relatively short order, found my way into an MEP engineering consulting firm, Lolker Associates. Wonderful place to work. Truly transformational for my career, and allowed me to work, in places that I never really thought I would. I did a fair amount of work like at the Woolworth building, where they were looking to redevelop the top part of that tower. At one point in time, had been the tallest building in the world, and a bunch of others too. Some ground up stuff, a lot of sustainability work fairly early in the lead days, and then just sort of figured I needed to learn more about business. That's where I ended up getting into Harvard Business School, and then going through the program there, and then kind of continued my externship basically for 2 years with Deloitte Consulting, where I wasn't technically in the corporate real estate group, but I'd interned with them over the summer of business school years. I moonlighted with them. I did about probably like 60% of my billable time over the almost 2 years I was with Deloitte, working with the corporate real estate transformation group. And that was fantastic, brought a completely different lens to things, and actually is what got me thinking about real estate technology for the first time. So after that, I ended up working at a boutique consulting firm for a while that really was focused on smart buildings, which got me the exposure there to work I've done on the energy side and kind of data analysis for building optimization. But at GPG, we really focused on developing, deploying, implementing, and then, in some cases, actually continuing to help operate full stack smart building solutions with big commercial real estate clients. Wonderful exposure again. Ended up joining a startup that was a company that I learned about on the consulting trail, Switch Automation, that was coming into the US from being based in Sydney, Australia. Again, wonderful experience that I'm so thankful that I sort of fell into, and helped build the US team there. And now it's a pretty big, much more successful startup with international growth. After that, went to Cushman through Google, and then had this opportunity to build a global practice related to smart connected building technologies, and then have recently, essentially, in 2021, started my own consulting practice, System 2. So pretty broad set of like real estate technology or real estate in general stakeholders that I've worked with, but it's always been in client service related to making buildings better, work better, more sustainable, better for health, health, wellness, safety, and then in the last couple of years, a big focus on tenant, occupant, user experience.
Mm. Yeah, so you have a really interesting vantage point because you're touching all these different disciplines. You're kind of approaching this world from the kind of mechanical engineering side, from the operational side, from the business side, from the technology side. And then you've also come at the space from kind of consulting, both management and MEP consulting, startups, on the management side. How has that informed how you look at this space? How is it informing your consulting practice? Because it's just not many people are kind of touching all the different areas of the building that you have.
Yeah, and it is interesting, and in some ways the management consulting stuff like I did at Deloitte was very different, but I'll tell you that came in really useful later on when I worked with Cushman Wakefield, and especially when I was out at Google. I was on a corporate real estate team, and so I had a pretty fundamental understanding of some of those processes and technologies. Even though I'm not necessarily I'm not a software engineer, I'm a mechanical engineer. But I understand technology at a product and solution level in a very broad way. Because I've worked in all of these places. So it's foundational for me where I sit today that I've worked in all these different, kind of angles of the same problem. But I think I wouldn't have it any other way. But it is a bit odd, right? I don't see a lot of people that do have that kind of breadth of experience. I mean, the places where I've gone deep and actually focused, it's really around sort of what buildings need to do. I think that's the theme that my career has coalesced around at this point. So often buildings are designed to look a certain way or to fit a certain financial model and serve as a financial asset, which of course they are in some aspects. But buildings do things, right? They are a product that has a user experience with different user groups, and there's a management function that you can't sustainably run a large commercial building without having a management team that is sustainability focused and data enabled, right? And so the building needs to do things for those people. There's a lot of things that buildings do for people that people don't see. I mean, the thing that's brought us together is air quality, right? And so you walk indoors in a space and you breathe the air. That has a direct impact on you. And if anyone is, I think the pandemic has been very clear in highlighting that for people, if they've been paying attention in a way that, has sort of made the invisible a bit more visible. But that sort of meta concept of buildings need to do things, they need to work in a certain way and with reason and purpose is how I've ended up focusing on real estate technology, because most of the services within a building are technology enabled in some capacity, or are at least affect technology in a serious way. Another good example there is 5G. I mean, now that we're moving towards 5G, the most ultra fast 5G, the millimeter wave technology does not transmit through windows and walls in the same way that the old sort of 2G, 3G, LTE cellular signals did. And so even though the building itself has not historically, in most cases, with some exceptions, it hasn't been a cell tower itself, it now is becoming much more imperative that the building considers its function in how cell phones operate, within the four walls. And so a lot of new developments are building in, small cell radio networks in order to propagate 5G signals more effectively, or they're at least thinking about it, considering it. Right. And so that's another example of just the building has to do things for people and different user groups. And I thinking through that the design of those services and processes and then how those are enabled by technology is sort of the driving force behind what I've done at all of those different career steps that I've taken.
Mm. So a lot has been written about the kind of this split incentives of the different entities and interests in a building, and the different perspectives that, whether it's an engineering firm or an architecture firm or an ownership group or whatever, they're all kind of coming at the building from a very different perspective. You've worked horizontally, across your career, and now your firm is very much focused in that way. Where do you think that people are looking at things the kind of same way or in an aligned way? And where do you think there's really a divergence? Unpack that for us a little bit.
Yeah, I think that gets back to this idea that like the building is a product and not just a financial asset or a bond. I've used this hashtag on LinkedIn a bunch. It's like hashtag buildings are not bonds, because like buildings, like if you look at the financial profile of a building, and if you're talking to the financial community, then like a building sort of has the return profile and the risk characteristics of a fixed income asset, right? I mean, it's an alternative asset class, but it's one that looks a lot like, a fixed income asset. And like that has basically, that has colored a lot of the industry and the investment, and even in some cases, the operations of buildings. I think to the detriment of what, like, say, the architects see buildings as, which, to them, it's this physical form that gets manifested into a real thing in the real world, and that's where like buildings diverge from financial assets. Of course, it's important that they be considered financial products. I get that, but like the building. So like take a bond, like the bond doesn't do anything other than just sit there and return a certain amount. It's a traded asset with no real thing underneath it. So then go to like a corporate bond. Well, corporate bonds are a little bit more interesting. They're fixed income assets, but then like they're tied to this company. And if that company starts to fall into bad prospects, then that bond starts to trade a lot more like equity than debt in the markets, right? And like there's even instruments in between equity and debt, like convertible bonds that kind of like sit between the two. But it's not as much like just a pure fixed income asset, like a US Treasury bond. Well, real estate's even farther removed from that in a way, because the income stream from the asset is tied to that product, that building being a product that actually makes people happy, and makes it does things for them such that they're going to want to continue to lease space in that asset. Like that's what it comes down to. And so there is a wide separation from the people that are, trading publicly traded REIT stocks in the financial market, and the people that actually occupy, like, say, an office building as a tenant or walk into a shopping center as a retail customer. There's a wide distance there. But it's important that we think more about the users as an industry, because a lot of buildings are not doing things for the people that go inside them, whether it's like bad user experience, or they're making them sick and unhealthy, or they're not optimally set up to prevent, disease transmission, which is obviously highly relevant right now, or they're not doing what they need to for ESG purposes. I mean, particularly they're just not sustainable. They waste way too much energy and water when they don't actually, above and beyond what they actually need to operate. They're inefficient. And so those drivers all matter towards the building being more of what the architect thinks of the building, and the engineers and the people that work in the buildings as a physical product. I'm starting to see, and maybe it's just wishful thinking, but I'm starting to feel and see that, and hear from clients, frankly, over the last couple of years. Some of it is them being pushed by ESG investors. Some of it's them just understanding they're not going to be able to lease their building if it isn't a good building. But the world is starting to move towards paying attention to real estate, particularly office buildings, as a product. And I think WeWork and the Flex movement had a hand in that. There's a variety of things the pandemic certainly has when it comes to health and safety. But it's starting to matter what the building actually does, and that it's not just a bond. Mm. And that change is happening in commercial and corporate real estate groups. So I'm hopeful that, like, the incentives may not still be fully aligned, but if the market demands products, you're going to start to pay attention to buildings differently. Like if you go to a city like New York, where I've done design, and you look at two buildings that are essentially the same like class of real estate across the street from each other, they may be designed in very different ways that would not have mattered to leasing brokers 5 or 10 years ago, maybe will matter now going forward. And I saw evidence of that at Cushman. And we had conversations with our leasing broker teams on behalf of clients that were asking about this stuff now, all of a sudden. Like, is the HVAC set up so that they can increase outside air ventilation and run filtration? And now all of a sudden, those two buildings that look essentially the same, you know, the cap rate and the dollars per square foot, net operating income per square foot might have been very similar. They're going to start to potentially look different as in the next leasing cycle.
Mm. So some of the changes that you've mentioned are happening just due to market forces. In some cases, there's regulatory things going on. I guess one other thing that's happening is a proliferation of different kind of certification marks. And in my intro and highlighting your bio, I mentioned that you're a licensed professional engineer. I did not mention that you're also LEED and Reset accredited. So can you talk about those two accreditations, what they entail, why you chose to pursue them, and then talk about them within the context of all the other accreditations out there that very much seem oriented towards some of the big trends and themes that you just highlighted.
Yeah, and the standards have followed those trends and themes. I've been LEED. I'm a legacy LEED AP, meaning I got it before they went to the version where you started to get designations for different types of LEED. So I got it back in 2007. Yeah, 2007, when I was working as a design engineer in New York. And, you know, me and some of the younger guys that I was friends with, we like our cohort of engineers, young engineers, were some of the first people in the firm to get LEED accredited. And I was like LEED 2.0, I think was the version I got accredited at. It might have been 2.1, but it was the 2 series. And you know, that was really the certification at that point in time. If you were going, and most new projects even back then were at least pursuing baseline certification. At that point, now you can hardly build anything in major cities in the US without it having at least LEED certified, you know, the lowest level. In many cases, they require you get silver or better, you know, or, along with, you know, other requirements. So LEED has been hugely successful, and it's important. You know, it suffers, as many of the certifications do, from the checklist phenomenon, which can provide some bad incentives for design teams. I mean, I'm not saying overall it's bad. I think it's been a net positive thing. I mean, you should run an energy model and try to figure out the energy profile of the building before you build it. And LEED is, you know, that's one of the things LEED has helped kind of introduce to the real estate design community. But in many ways, LEED has been very design focused, and there are ways you can get points that are just kind of not that useful for sustainability. So, you know, I did a lot of LEED projects as a design engineer, and then I went, you know, into business school, into management consulting, and kind of didn't do a lot with LEED other than contributing to things that would help some of my clients get LEED on their projects. In a couple of cases, they did or already were. But I was mostly working in smart building technology, so helping them get data out of those buildings and optimize and run them more efficiently. That's kind of been the challenge. One of the challenges with LEED is it's just so disconnected from what actually happens in the real world. And again, back to your sort of, how are the real estate actors playing together? That question, you know, it's no shock to anyone in the industry that they haven't played very well together historically. They haven't even talked to each other. It just hasn't even really been that much of a consideration that, you know, the loop is closed on the design. It just gets tossed over the fence into construction, into operations after construction. Oftentimes warranty issues aren't even picked up post-construction. And it's just operated however it's operated. That team operating it may be good, may not be all that good. They may care about tech and data or not care about tech and data. And then you don't necessarily realize the vision of the LEED building, particularly when it comes to energy and water performance. You know, those have been the places where I think there's a big gap. So that's kind of what got me interested with Reset. Reset is newer, much newer overall. Reset is a standard that was formed by a architecture group. The founder, Rafer Wallace, out of Shanghai, architecture company called Giga. and they've started reset as a measurement-based standard. And this was a number of years ago they started it. It actually has a pretty good foothold in China and East Asia, where air quality, particularly outdoor air quality, has been a much bigger issue influencing the indoor air quality environment. And in the intervening period, the well building standard just weren't meeting their needs of needing continuous monitoring and data. And what really has happened is IoT has become a reality in certain categories. Indoor air quality monitoring is one of those key categories, where it's just become a thing you can actually go buy for a fairly affordable amount of money and implement. And that has enabled them to set up a standard. This is the reset standard that is both a building certification and also a technology certification. So it's sort of a marketplace with solutions on both sides. I became a reset accredited professional, just like I'm a lead AP. They followed that same kind of model where you go through training, pass the certification exam, do projects for clients through their process. I got that in late 2020, along with a group of people that I had been with at Cushman Wakefield. There aren't that many reset APs in the US. It's just starting to sort of get more of a foothold here. There are some, but there's not nearly enough projects. And one of the things I want to be working on over the next year is finding reset, clients that want to pursue reset certification and working with them to do that. It's a very cost-effective certification to get. And that's because it's simple. It's literally just based off measuring for the commercial interior version, just measuring 5 indoor air quality variables with monitors that they have certified. And there's a set of monitors and data platforms you can choose from that have been through their certification process. They upload data through a basic API feed to the Reset Cloud. The Reset Cloud is just paid for with a small recurring fee, similar to your fees to keep up to date with like your well certification, lower as I understand it in cost. And then the Reset AP is essentially the consultant for the project that makes sure the monitors are deployed in the right place in the building, and that you're hitting all the different targets. And they can work with the client on remediation options as well. Why I like Reset is because it is purely about data. There's no prescriptive design at all about it, right? So as long as you hit the parameters on the 5 indoor air quality variables, your temperature, humidity, CO2, PM 2.5, and total volatile, TVOC, total volatile organic compound, then you hit it for a certain period of time without going over in the spaces you're monitoring, based on an algorithm that you can go look up. It's relatively straightforward to read. Then you get certified. So it's proofs in the pudding, right? Like you either get it or you don't. And there's lots of ways you can achieve that. That's up to the design teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. So one of the defining trends of the past generation, and especially touching on some of these certifications, is kind of the greening of buildings, sustainability, reducing the carbon footprint of buildings. Can you talk to us a little bit about what's gone on, in terms of when this started kind of taking root, what's been accomplished so far, and what you see as the frontier and kind of further pushing sustainability into the built environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to continue to grow as a driver. I mean, it's becoming very evident that ESG investing is growing substantially in power across lots of asset classes. Real estate is one where it's directly related. I mean, the investor community is directly related to the asset. So that's good because it's starting to force those incentives for building design and operations towards doing things for the long term. Buildings live for a long time. Mm-hmm. So there's a compounding effect of changes that you make now in the built environment on sustainability. So I've been a part of the green building movement at some level for almost 15 years at this point, and I appreciate what they do. I support it. I think it's the right thing to do. I would like to see a lot more buildings go for ultra high performance goals, whether or not they get certifications or not. I'd love to see a lot more net zero energy buildings attempted, or just ultra high performance based off the financial situation of that building, and get some of that movement out of just the cities that have really good climates like the Bay Area for it, right? So there's a lot of opportunity to do better when it comes to sustainability. What is interesting though is my perspective on this has changed a lot over the last really sort of 4 years or so, where I was full on about energy performance, and now I've started to understand and learn and let it seep into me that can't be done at the expense of building health, wellness, and safety. And then, especially not even so much with the pandemic, because I knew how bad HVAC infrastructure can be in office buildings. I've been working in deploying HVAC fault detection and diagnostic type analytics for a long time, going back to when I was at GPG Advisors, and then we built that product when I was at Switch Automation into the Switch platform. I've seen lots of buildings that aren't running how they're supposed to. That is the rule rather than the exception, generally speaking. What's really changed my mind on that, though, is the effect of those systems not functioning as desired, and even some of the design standards, the lack of appreciation, I feel like, within ASHRAE, or attention given to indoor air quality as opposed to energy. The relative importance of ASHRAE 90.1 versus ASHRAE 62.1. That was really brought to the fore to me by reading Healthy Buildings, which came out in April, right after the pandemic shut down. That's the book by Joseph Allen and John Macomber. John had been my professor for several classes in second year at HBS. And I kind of learned who Joseph Allen was over the course of the early parts of the pandemic, and then reading that book. And then now he's all over the news and everywhere, as one of the leading figures from the Harvard School of Public Health. That book really was the kind of final, nail in the coffin for me on the trade-off between sustainability and health and wellness. Like, the building there's a foundation of values here, a pyramid of values, and the foundation has to be that the building allows people to perform and not get sick. And if that means it uses a little bit more energy, there are areas, I don't want to overplay it, but there are areas where there becomes a trade-off between things like energy performance and water conservation and health and safety. I just feel that you should prioritize health and wellness and safety. And that's something I didn't appreciate in the first sort of 10 years of my career at the same level.
So do you think, health and safety is the name of the game today during the pandemic, as the built environment has been completely paralyzed in many cases by not being able to get people back in, either due to being shut down by regulators, or by people not having confidence to go back into the buildings without getting sick. So do you think this is going to be something that is going to outlast the pandemic? And once people get vaccinated, are we going to see a long tail in terms of how healthy buildings and indoor air quality features, in terms of building management, in terms of code, reg, and how the tensions that you described with some of the sustainability focused certifications and programs that were already happening, are those going to be now slowed or diverted now with this focus on health and wellness?
Well, I don't know that the sustainability requirements will be slowed so much, because they're going to force, hopefully, I think the industry is going to do both things at once. Keep in mind, like, you can do a lot for indoor air quality improvement without taking too huge of an energy penalty. There's a few ways that you sort of blunt that trade-off. One is there's actually some technologies out there that are actively looking to do that. Things like air cleaning that actively remove CO2 and, in some other cases, other indoor pollutants too, without having to introduce like a higher outside air load. And that is one way. There's a cost to that, a capital cost to that. There's also just eliminating waste in HVAC overall, right? So making sure that everything is running properly, running your economizers when you're supposed to, and making sure that that you don't have, like, there isn't a third of your VAV boxes that have failed with some sort of major fault, which is actually like a real number. Schneider Electric has collected data on this. They over a 3-year period implemented something like 200,000 HVAC pieces of HVAC equipment into Facility Advisor, which is their FDD solution. You can buy through EcoStructure, the EcoStructure product line, and they found that I think it was 36% of unique pieces of equipment had some sort of significant fault on them. So like, fix all the stuff that's broken, and so I've been working for a long time in that kind of space, applying analytics to determine faults and failures and moving towards more proactivity and potentially in some cases towards, predictive maintenance too, with things like vibration monitoring and other tools that give you leading indicators of system failure that had been impossible before. That's all actually happening now, right? And so I think that stuff is going to be long lasting. I really do. And it's only going to grow. It was growing anyway. It should be accelerated now. Some of the newer things like indoor air quality monitoring, well, they've been adopted more as more solutions have come online and are becoming more cost effective, are giving scale pricing, and I don't know where it's going to go, but I certainly hope and want to find clients that want to do indoor air quality measurement and monitoring throughout their portfolios. I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing from people in the industry. Definitely from the supplier side, they've seen really big growth. And I've talked to a lot of clients and just people in the industry I'm talking to who are at least actively exploring or piloting doing this. Indoor air quality monitoring is kind of like metering is to energy. It's if you're an energy engineer, you can walk into any building and you kind of know the things to go look for, where energy is going to be wasted. But to paint that picture for somebody and to measure and verify the things that you're going to do, you need a meter, right? You got to measure the outcome. And the meter is sort of measuring the input to the building, which is the thing you're trying to reduce. It's the outcome. The same with IAQ. Most building automation systems, BMS out there, don't have the same level and types of sensoring that you get in an indoor air quality monitor. They're generally just measuring temperature, maybe humidity and CO2 in certain zones. You're never doing PM 2.5 or volatile organic compounds. That's just not like, it's not germane to the automation of the HVAC system in most cases. So you need to measure those things if those are things you care about, and those things that you should care about. They affect the health and well-being of the people inside a building you own or are leasing space in. So you need to measure that, right? And that's the meter for doing it, is the indoor air quality monitor. So I do think that's going to continue to be adopted. There's going to be a lasting change. You'll have variation on how that information is provided to people, whether it's just kind of a back of house facility management data source, or if it's provided to occupants in a more proactive way. But it's going to be a change for sure. I think we need to not look at the trade-off between IAQ and energy, which is really the meat of it, as so much of a trade-off. There are interventions you can make that are just binary. It's going to be one or the other, right? Like you lower the temperature set point in the summer, might make people more comfortable. It's going to use more energy, right? For the things like that, you just need to find where you sit and go for it, right? Hit the sustainability level that you want to hit. But for other things, we've got to find clever ways to actually, continue pushing the sustainability envelope and meet a much higher threshold, baseline level of indoor air quality.
So earlier we talked about the kind of different human interests and different disciplines kind of coming into the building. Picking up on that same theme, your previous comments just touched on this. There are many different technologies, systems, and ultimately data that is being generated within a building. How do you see them integrating? Are they integrated right now? Are they talking to each other? And is that being built in for all these cutting edge new sensor technologies and otherwise that are hitting the market? And you talked about the BMS just capturing basic stuff. Are they getting layered in? Are they being kind of implemented, separately? And is there fragmentation? And then ultimately, with the whole metering idea that you presented, having coherent data on all the different air quality metrics, and then as they relate to things beyond air quality, it seems like it's important for some technology or data platform to pull all of that together. Do you see any signs of that happening?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's kind of the bulk of where I've spent my time over the last, say, 5 years, is that topic. So, I mean, the baseline state of any existing commercial building right now, generally speaking, the average case is that all of those things are disconnected. Oftentimes, they're even on different networks. If it is a landlord commercial building, multi-tenant, you get a little bit more consolidation of the technology in corporate owner-occupied buildings because they have a corporate IT group that's going to put in their network. But all of the stuff is from a data perspective, is in silos. That problem has not been broadly solved. There's dozens of companies out there that can do that. Any company from sort of the controls integrator that put in your local building automation system to venture-backed startups like Switch Automation that I work for, is a company with a leading product in this space, to the products coming from the major controls companies like EcoStruxure coming from Schneider. It just is one example. I mean, they all have a product in this space. So everyone understands the value, I think, at this point of centralizing the data, but you still end up with all these disparate data sources, and there's work and effort to centralize it, to figure out what everything is, to do the coding to actually get it from the API, or to implement a standard like BACnet that allows you to directly grab it from the edge, from the systems out at the edge. Incidentally, I think BACnet is maybe the most important thing that ASHRAE has done. It's grossly underappreciated as a data standard and protocol for building and industrial IoT. It's a lot more than I think what it's just sort of used as a word to describe DMS. It's actually a really, really important protocol, basically, for how you structure and organize data that represents the built environment. And I don't think it's hardly ever implemented fully, but the industry is moving towards standards like that and others to define these things. But the general sort of baseline stage is that there's just a lot of work to get it there. And that's the cost that makes it less scalable than people would like. Clients, customers of that, so the building owners or facility managers, VCs that invest in those companies, they all want to get rid of that friction that right now is hard to get rid of. That said, the industry is definitely steadily marching in that direction. I mean, there's still lots of buildings out there that would benefit from putting more things in one spot, but there's also every year more and more companies that have an enterprise data lake, or what at Cushman we called an operational data platform. That's one of the places where you pull this together, or a workplace app or a tenant experience app on the landlord side that pulls together the more user-facing technologies like visitor management and access control and sort of productivity and video conferencing and amenity services and reservations and things like that. So it's starting to happen, but there's no product to go do all of that. Any way you try to do it, from any baseline state I've ever seen in a client situation, whether they're behind or average or sophisticated, there's still no way to do that in one product. There's always some sort of architecture that has to be put together using standard components, but there's always some approach to it that applies to that specific client at this point. That's big part of the reason why I started System 2. I mean, developing that strategy, solution architecture, and then being able to implement programmatically those solutions, including the engineering consulting elements, knowing how a meter gets installed by an electrician, which I just happen to have had a lot of experience doing from programs. That end-to-end solution is grossly missing in the market right now, though there are companies that focus on that and do it. Some of whom I've worked with historically. There's just a lot more demand out there than there is supply. for that type of service right now.
So you get looks on a lot of different technologies. I mean, you're passionate about building technology. Which are some that you're most pumped for, that have been hitting the market? Like, just a chance for you to kind of share what stuff out there you're really excited about and you think other people should be excited about.
I think I get the most excited about things that have really defensible IP. So if you look at prop tech, there's a lot of like really good software, but that with the right money and time is fairly replicable. So take like a mobile app that's an experience app. And I don't mean to diminish anyone's accomplishments in this area. I mean, people who are making user experience better should be commended for what they're doing, right? Because it historically hasn't been very good in a lot of office buildings. But like many of those platforms are fairly replicable, and therefore you see a lot of fragmentation in that market. There's a few clear leaders. They lead on brand. The functionality is largely overlapping with some nuances and tweaks to business model. And the differentiation is largely around how they sell and choose to work with clients in their business model, their customer success teams, things like that. It's more like enterprise solutions than it is like majorly defensible IP. There are some interesting things out there where they're just doing it in a completely different way. So some of the access control technologies, mobile phone is a badge. I don't know if you want me to name names or not, but there's a couple companies out there that have one in particular that has real defensible IP around that is just unique and is almost just sort of rebuilt how you do access control. That's really interesting to me. There's some companies doing really interesting things around trying to displace the traditional controls companies. EasyIO is one that's been bought by Johnson Controls recently, and I don't know what they're doing with it, but they took the open source framework that Tritium had developed that Niagara was based off of, and actually built that into a product line and was getting real channel partner distribution scale. And this was like a different type of building automation system, right? I mean, it worked fundamentally the same way, but it was much more open and easy to use. And you didn't need to buy it through this sort of legacy channel of these big old companies that sell PLCs, and a slowly evolving software product. So that I find really, really interesting. The indoor air quality stuff is really interesting. The people that have actually really good monitor platforms, where it's the hardware, the data platform integrated into a very seamless IoT solution. And they do the right things where the sort of software that does things around automating recalibration of these sensors and things that the traditional building management systems didn't do, but that matter in order to maintain accuracy, they're able to do that because it is this sort of vertically integrated IoT platform. So I see there's kind of 4 areas of those vertically integrated IoT platforms that I've seen have really interesting applications directly in real estate. One was IAQ monitoring, as I mentioned. And for the best in class on those, just go look up the ones that are reset certified. Honestly, I've done a lot of work with the Aware product, and there's is really outstanding. I have a home monitor here that's an Aware element, and I look at it constantly. It's so interesting to understand your indoor air quality data, like at your house, and like the effect of what like your toaster does on your particulate matter, like stuff like that. How hard it is to maintain humidity levels in the right range in the winter in a cold place. So IAQ is one. Leak detection is another one. That's the one that's probably going to grow the fastest because it's starting to become subsidized by the insurance companies. Leaks are such a big deal, especially in tall buildings or buildings with large water systems like shopping centers. That one's going to take off like a rocket. Occupancy monitoring, really interesting too. There's a lot of ways to do that, but with some of the overhead camera technologies that are looking like at infrared images, and they're able to do really accurate machine learning based, like computer vision people counting, as interval data. You're getting really rich granular occupancy data right now in an interesting way. And then vibration monitoring. The only truly predictive leading indicator, mechanical, analytics that I've seen are based off occupancy monitoring, and then they use some other correlating variables like temperature and sound. but you actually apply sensors to a motor or rotating piece of equipment, and then it can start to actually tell you when the bearing's failing in advance. Super interesting stuff with that. So I get excited about those. I get less excited about random AI solutions for things that don't seem to have any like way to explain what they do. You know, I mean, there's a lot of these like AI black box optimization products for HVAC where it's like, okay, I mean, it doesn't surprise me you can use machine learning to more optimally finely tune the chilled water set point in a big chiller plant. Like that's a lot better than a human being pushing a button or just never changing it at all. I wonder about the sort of benefit of that versus the cost of actually integrating. If you actually look at the real market size for a solution like that, it needs to be so well programmed at the fundamental control system level that you're going to have to spend a lot of money if you look at a distribution of buildings and don't just cherry pick the best like 5 or 10%. You're going to spend so much money to get that solution to where it can be effective that it's not going to add value outside of those like edge cases that are the best buildings. So there's always a lot of like smoke in that area. And I don't think there's a lot of fire there, honestly, just because of the way the market is set up. Yeah. So those are some of the ones that I think I'm finding the most interesting right now.
So that is awesome. Now, a slightly different version of the question: which ones do you think are going to win over the next 10 to 20 years? Which ones do you think we're going to see kind of across lots of buildings? It's going to become more part of the quote furniture of the building. And then I guess relatedly, like how do you think buildings are going to change over the next generation beyond just the pure technology? What other changes do you think are coming down the pike?
Sure. Yeah, I think the prop tech companies that are going to win by and large, like one of the main causal variables there are going to be the ones that figure out a channel distribution strategy. The issue with real estate is it's a giant market, but it's highly fragmented. I mean, even the like biggest services companies or biggest companies in the world that focus on real estate, the Cushmans, like where I work, the big property managers, that are brokerages too, the big architecture firms, the like Johnson Controls of the world, they all still operate with local offices. They're in some kind of structure that has localization because you need to have local relationships really essentially at every single building in order to be able to sell, right? So there's some portfolio level selling, like if you know the right people at a private equity fund that owns a bunch of office buildings across the US, you might be able to get into a group of buildings at once, but that's long and hard, and you still end up having to operate in every single market, right? So say you've got a visitor management kiosk technology, well, you're gonna have to go put that in the lobby of every building and change the way that the security process works at every single building. So there's this huge localized effort that as a tech company, you don't want to, you just essentially as a venture-backed company cannot build that into your business model. You can do it at small scale, but at some point you have to make a decision that other people that are local service-based companies, maybe even a company like System 2, like mine, that's explicitly going to be a services-based company and not a high-growth tech startup, like they have to do that work for you. And so you have to get in the business of training them and skilling them up and making it part of their line card and leveraging all those relationships that they have to get scale. The one interesting exception to that I see is some of the like really leading tenant experience apps. They are doing a really good job at direct sales or selling through at least like a smaller number of very large partners. We'll see if they can continue to do that. At a certain point that your customer success team just has to get too big compared to your product and the gross margins don't look as attractive. So that's an interesting one to watch. But all the companies, like say the technology that Safe Traces has, at some point, you guys are probably going to want to work with other people to deploy that technology so that you don't have to infinitely scale your customer success team, which increasingly will just start to look like an engineering consulting group. So
you're obviously incredibly well informed on what's going on in the market. Talk to us about your kind of information diet. What are you reading? What are you listening to? Who are you talking to kind of keep on the cutting edge of what's going on? And anything obviously that's relevant to other folks kind of passionate about the built environment broadly, but then particularly as it relates to technology.
Yeah, my information diet is interesting. I don't go super deep on smart building stuff all that often. I tend to use the little bit of time that I have to consume information to be on like broader topics, because so much of the work that I do, especially over the last 2 years, like when I was at Cushman, was interacting with the community, interacting with companies like Safe Traces and the startup community. I've just carved out this ability to do that as part of my job, because it's become so important in what I do to match client needs with solutions. Well, you got to know both sides of the market then, right? You got to spend time with both sides. And we'll see. I sure hope I can continue to do that running my own practice. I feel like I have to in a lot of ways, but I'll probably have to skinny that down to some extent. I don't know. But so like I interact a lot with that community through LinkedIn. I don't do a lot on Twitter, and I find that the best information, I just don't like the form factor of Twitter. I don't like the short message thing. I tend to go down rabbit holes and I just turned it off basically. So I do a lot of posting and reading on LinkedIn because I find they do a very good job with their algorithm of surfacing things that I'm interested in. And that are related to my network and the companies that I've worked with. And I've done a very good job of like personally curating my own LinkedIn to follow the things I actually want to follow to get more signal and less noise. So that's definitely my number one. A couple of the Axios newsletters have been really good for me lately. Generate on the energy side and Cities, which is one of their newer ones, have both been really interesting on things related to like real estate and energy and sustainability and climate change topics. Do occasionally still just go to Green Tech Media to follow, energy stuff. That continues to be an interesting source of content. On the podcast front, I mostly do, like I've listened to Econ Talk since almost the beginning of it. That's one I listen to. It has nothing to do with real estate or smart buildings, but I would just encourage anyone to listen to it because it's awesome. I mean, I was an engineer before business school. I knew nothing about economics really. And I feel like most of my economic, to the extent that I know anything about economics, it's from HBS and probably 5x on top of that from listening to Econ Talk for 13 years. So I've listened to every episode. It's really good. And I listen to Pivot to stay up on tech stuff, big tech type stuff. Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess before we close out here, so the floor is yours. Anything that you think we should have talked about that we didn't? And then please tell people how they can connect with you, how they can learn more about System 2 if they're interested in following up and working with you and chatting with you.
Sure. Yeah. So find me on LinkedIn. That's the best way. If you just like web search me, it should be at the top. And then you can follow System 2 from there. System2consulting.com is my website. It is still fairly young, so it will start to improve and do more over time. But I will continue to and probably start to accelerate a lot of the posting and content generation on these topics as I really start to incorporate that as part of what I'm doing on more of a day-to-day basis. So hopefully there'll be more medium for us to interact through there. That's the best way to find me. I guess like just in closing, I really encourage people who are interested in real estate or real estate participants and stakeholders, really whoever you are, whether you're on the design team or operations, even if you're on the finance, the capital markets side, certainly, asset managers, people directly responsible for the financial performance of buildings. I encourage the industry to think about what buildings should do and how they should work. One of the things that I consistently find with clients is just a new way of thinking for them is when I question them or push them on well, what do you want the building to do? They'll come and say things like, well, we want it to be technologically advanced. We want innovation. We want better tenant experience. We need a better workplace experience to lure our workforce back and give them a reason to come to the office after they get the vaccine and the pandemic's over. And so, okay, that makes sense. I get that as like a strategic goal. But then what then do you want the building to do? And, if people like me can provide you with a framework for the types of things that are possible, that are common at relatively low cost, but let's think through how you actually want it to work, and what you want the user experience to be, whether that's for your facility management users because you want to drive operational efficiency, or whether it's for your tenants or your workforce because you want to increase productivity or get them to re-sign their leases, or you want to rebrand this building as a Class A building. You have to think through what the building needs to do, right? And how it needs to actually function and operate in a better way. So take the things that people are annoyed with and, like the queue at the security desk. How can we do this in a better way? And when you position yourself from that standpoint, like what it needs, what capabilities you need to enable, what the use cases are, what the user experiences are for different people that interact with that building, you start to have more of a product perspective, and you can think about a roadmap of improving that product to be better for all of the major drivers. That's how you get sustainability, operational efficiency, health, wellness, safety. That's how you get better user experience. It's going to drive like those moments that make people excited about the built environment. It's more than just about how it looks or like what the cash flow statement is for the building. It's about how it actually functions and provides services for people.
Yeah. Well, and that's awesome closing thoughts, because it kind of perfectly sums up your own background of being someone who's been in the technology product world, but working in buildings. In some way, your point is that the building is a product and needs to provide a certain set of value, features, other things that ultimately make people happy or want to be there, give them what they want. So awesome stuff. You're often kind of in a minority of people who think that way, but let's hope that that thinking really catches much more momentum and fire in the coming years. Thank you so much for being on. We're grateful for your time, your perspective, and look forward to being in touch. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.